I'm Don Tse, better known as the Don of Beer.
And I'm Sauter, better known as Pints and Panels.
Welcome to the 15th episode of the All About Beer podcast. Every 2 weeks, we talk with leading experts and take a deep dive into one topic in beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you want to toss us a few bucks, visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others. This week on the show, we're going to talk about beer and food pairing. Our guest is the legendary Garrett Oliver, who is the brewmaster of Brewing, but more importantly, wrote probably the most popular book about beer and food pairing, The Brewmaster's Table. So, Em, do you like beer and do you like food?
Yes and yes. I really enjoy contrasting flavors in beer and food, how a juicy IPA works really well with salty foods like a taco. I'm a sucker for that salty sweet flavor sensation, and I think beer is really perfect for that.
Yeah. I think of beer as food, and so the same way a steak might taste better with mashed potatoes or ice cream might taste better with chocolate syrup, then sometimes I think food tastes better when it's paired with the right beer, or beer can taste better when it's paired with the right food.
Totally agree. You want that perfect bite, and since beer encompasses so many different flavors, it's really easy to get that when you pair beer with food.
Yeah. And we have the expert on it that we're
going
to talk to in a few minutes.
This is going to be really good.
Yes. We'll introduce our guest and get into a conversation. But first, if you'd like to help support the All About Beer podcast, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com.
Attention all managers and team leaders. Do you want to provide your staff with the best training in the beer industry? Look no further than Beer Savvy Online by the Cicerone Certification Program. In just a few hours, your team will master the fundamentals of excellent beer service, styles, and beer flavor. At the end of the course, your team can earn a globally recognized beer industry credential. And the best part, as a manager, you can monitor your team's learning progress. Set your business apart with a Beer Savvy staff today. To learn more, visit cicerone.org and click on the group training button. And if you'd like to learn more about how you can get your company or message featured on this show and others produced by All About Beer, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Thanks again to Cicerone for sponsoring this episode.
Garrett Oliver is the brewmaster of the Brooklyn Brewery, the author of The Brewmaster's Table, and the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Companion to Beer. He has been brewing craft beer since 1989 and is a veteran of over 1,000 beer dinners and tastings in 16 countries. An original board member of Slow Food USA, he later went on to become a counselor of Slow Food International. In 2014, Garrett was the recipient of the James Beard Award as the country's top drinks professional. In 2020, he founded the Michael James Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling, a 501c3 grant-making nonprofit organization that funds scholarships for technical education in the brewing and distilling fields for people of color. In 2022, Garrett was enthroned by the Knights of the Brewers Fork in Belgium, descendants of the ancient Brewers Guild. Welcome to the show, Garrett.
Good to be here.
So I guess first off, let's start with basics. Can you provide some basic concepts for how beer lovers can enjoy beer better by pairing it with food, or vice versa, making food better by pairing it with beer?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that, it's not a science, and you have to keep in mind that the most important part of it is having a good time, which means that, if you construct too many theories about it, et cetera, you're not necessarily going to have as good time as you would otherwise. But, there are definitely some principles that you want to think about. And some of them the first ones are relatively obvious. So the first thing is that you want to balance what I call the intensity of the food with the intensity of the dish, right? So if you have something that's relatively mild in flavor, say it's like butter poached lobster, or turbo or something like that, a white flaky fish with a sauce that's not spicy. Well, you're probably not going to come at that with a really intense IPA because you're just going to wipe it out, right? So, the idea is that, okay, I'm now for a dish like that looking for something relatively subtle. And then within that, well, now what am I looking for? So you might decide, okay, well, what is our seasoning? Is our seasoning lemon? In which case you might say, okay, a gently sour beer could work here and have the acidities pair together, or you could look from a different direction and say the orange peel in a wit beer is going to pick up well, and that's going to be a winning combination, plus a little edge of acidity from the raw wheat. And in a way, I kind of have a feeling, even though I don't write music, but I used to be a filmmaker, and I could kind of see scenes in my head. And I think that people who write music can hear music in their head before they write it in a certain way. And similarly, I would say that I can like mentally taste combinations. I put them next to each other and see whether I can, get them to seem like they're going to fit together.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So then, I mean, the good thing about it is that it's kind of a creative exercise, and there are sometimes surprises. Most of the surprises that I found are, 95% of them are positive surprises, things that I didn't think would work, but actually turned out working.
Like what? Yeah. I gotta know.
Oh man, so many really.
What's your favorite?
My favorite is probably black chocolate stout and Stilton. So Imperial Stout and Stilton. And so what happened was I was doing a demonstration, and I was saying, okay, we're going to either serve our barley wine with Stilton, or we're going to do chocolate truffles with black chocolate stout. People got the messages mixed up, and I ended up with black chocolate stout and Stilton. And I had to go on stage like in 10 minutes when I found this out. The lady who was doing the oyster presentation was finishing up, and I look at my supplies here, and I've got black chocolate stout and Stilton. And I say, oh my God, I'm in trouble. This is horrible. What am I going to do? And then I tasted the two of them together, and it was like, ta-da! It was like, and all the years I have been eating Stilton, I never really realized that it has this huge chocolate flavor in the center.
Really? What?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are all these things that you don't think about. I mean, if you read about them, you might see them. I mean, you hear people refer to fudgy or something like that for Stilton sometimes, but the Imperial Stout just brought this huge chocolate thing out of the center, and the beer was twice as good with the cheese, and the cheese was twice as good with the beer. And I just walked out there smoothly and said, ladies and gentlemen, I have a brand new sensation for you.
I am a genius. Look at what I did.
I'm a genius. But there are things that you learn from being in competition with other, with sommeliers who are bringing wine. I never really realized for a long time that one of the biggest aromatics in Parmigiano Reggiano cheese is pineapple. I mean, and a barley wine at a certain age tends to have a very similar quality to it. And these all have chemical names attached to them. So in this case, ethyl butyrate. But you kind of look at these things, and they show up in different places in nature, and you can kind of link them together on the palate. So they tend to, and some of these things are obvious. Like if you have a caramelized flavor in a beer, say, in my case, if I'm doing something, it might be Brooklyn Lager, or it might be a Belgian double, or it might be some sort of caramelized or dark German lager, Schwarzbier or something. If you put that together with a steak, or even a pizza, or a burger, or whatever else, so many flavors in food are based around flavors of heat, roasting, caramelizing, toasting. So when you put those flavors together, they kind of recognize each other and tend to link together on your palate, in a really different way than, say, a wine would approach, where the wine is doing all contrast. Beer can do contrast and harmony at the same time, which is what gives it special powers in comparison to wine most of the time.
Okay. Can I rewind a bit there? You meant, do you have any? It sounded to me.
Talk about beer for 3 hours.
Okay. Good.
I'll try to chop it into smaller chunks.
I think that I found I'm not articulating myself very well. I think a lot of people, when they think of beer and food pairings, they think of like the primary flavor of the food and the primary flavor of the beer and try and match them. But when you're talking about the Stilton and the Imperial Stout and the Parmesan and the pineapple, it's almost like those are kind of, I would say, secondary or more subtle notes of those foods. So do you find beer and food pairing better when we think about secondary flavors or primary flavors? And how would you suggest people tease out secondary flavors for pairing?
Well, the primary flavors have to stand up first. So, and that comes with that whole idea of one thing not overwhelming the other. But one thing you find out, and sometimes I have found out in competition to my frustration, is that, a salty, a salty thing, say cheese, with a sugary thing, people just, even if you have a better pairing, people love it.
That's my favorite. I'm sorry. That's my favorite.
I
love it.
Like you can't win. Even if I have a great pairing, say I have Stilton and the other guy comes with a port or, a sweet white wine, it doesn't even have to be a great pairing. It's just the salt and the sugar, and it's like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. People just go nuts. And I'm saying, like, well, look at the beauty of how this thing came together and what they don't care, right? It's like, so if you're doing competition, and sometimes I am, I have to come with something sweet. Now I can do sweet and caramelized. I can do sweet, like, a lot of barrel-aged American imperial stouts, not mine, but other people's, are very sugar heavy. So if you came with Bourbon County Stout, for example, which has like 10% residual sugar, you're going to blow the wine out of the water. But if you come with something relatively dry, even if you do have a great pairing, so those are things that are primary, like salt versus sugar, everybody likes it. Acid, you would think that acid plus acid is not going to work, but actually, if you're thinking of acid plus bitterness or acid plus acid works together really well, and does not tend to be something where, like, you build up too much acidity. Rather, you find a harmony that you might not find with a bitter beer. And so I tend to think with things that have a lot of acid to them, that acidity can work. Also, when you often have acidity show up in foods alongside sugar, and a great, to balance it out, barbecue sauce, ketchup. I mean, those are things that are extremely acidic and extremely sweet at the same time. Right. So you can actually go either way with those. You can pair, your classic American barbecue sauce or honey mustard or whatever else with a sour beer, or you can come with something, that is sweeter as well, from a different direction.
But you are not recommending that we put ketchup in our beer.
No, I am
sometimes sometimes Flanders Red has that nice ketchup note, actually. So you kind of, it's there. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the acetic acid. Mm-hmm. And so the acetic acid, there's vinegar, in ketchup, and those volatile acetic notes are definitely part of that Flanders style. So I would say absolutely. For a long time, I found it very difficult to find a pairing for just straight up tomatoes, like marinara sauce with no cheese. It was just really, really difficult. Also difficult for wine, because the tomatoes have a lot of acidity and a lot of sugar, and can be difficult to pair. And one beer, Late and Lamented, that we don't make anymore, at least not in the United States, we found to be a wonderful pairing, and that was Sriracha Ace. Something about the Sriracha Ace hop and its weird lemon dill like flavor, that herbal quality, almost basil like, just worked its way somehow right into the red tomato sauce, and it turned out to be a great pairing, which I used for many years.
So that sounds like another
Brooklyn horns.
Yeah.
So that sounds like another tip I guess people can use for beer and food pairing at home is that if they think about foods that work together, like you were saying, dill and tomato, then you find a beer substitute for one of those. In this case, you were saying Sriracha Ace as a substitute for the dill would pair well with the tomato the way dill and tomato pair. Is that fair?
And caramelization is one of the main ones. Not that you can't, I mean, think about a steak. Okay, we think about a steak, it's like you want to have the best cut of steak. You want to, cook it properly, say till it's medium rare. But a lot of people don't realize that, okay, you really do want to have a nice steak, but the cooking method is much more important than the steak itself. You would rather have a kind of a chuck steak cooked well with a beautiful crust and perfectly medium rare and salted properly than you would a really beautiful porterhouse dry aged boiled, right? They can both they'll both you're saying ugh, right? Gray meat. But both could be medium rare. It wouldn't matter. The thing that matters is salt and caramelization, and then the steak flavor really comes, the fat comes second. So you gotta get that part right first. Seasoning is super important. And that's one reason why I'll ask chefs when I have to pair something in advance. It's like, okay, you say chilies, how much chilies? Like what kind of scale are we working with? A prickle in the background or some heat? And try to tease out like what is going to be the main primary and secondary thing going on here. Because as somebody who does a lot of dinners in other countries, I have to set these things up beforehand and fairly imagine what they're going to taste like together. And, a lot of these dishes become very complicated. And as you would imagine, they are foreign. So, they may not be all familiar flavors. You might have to do some research.
Right. Okay. You mentioned intensity. Are there other sensory elements that people should be thinking about, like temperature and, like, for example, beer is carbonated? Do you think about that as well, or?
Well, I mean, carbonation is just a great boon generally to pairing. It provides its own acidity in the form of carbonic acid, but also kind of gives you this, physical scrubbing action of removing whatever it is you have on your tongue, which is one reason why beer does so much better with cheese than wine does. And, I always like to say there are two kinds of sommeliers, that I go into competition with: the ones who know they're going to lose and the ones who don't know they're going to lose. The ones that don't know they're going to lose are actually so much more fun because, because they really try hard. The ones who know they're going to lose in advance, they're already apologizing, and they're kind of depressed, like at the beginning of they got talked into this, because it is a losing battle on their side, even though people will tell you, oh, it's a beer, a cheese and wine party. It's like, yeah, not really.
No, nothing beats beer and cheese. Is the best. It's the best food combo in the whole world. Like, I'm obsessed. I love it.
Oh, absolutely.
I call the carbonation I call it the mouth napkin, because it literally like scrubs your mouth. It's like a little napkin in your mouth, and it's like, okay, hold on, and then you're like, okay, go ahead, and like.
I thought you said mouse napkin, like
no, mouse napkin. It could mouth napkin.
No, I refer to it as scrubbing bubbles. Like the commercial for the for the detergent. I mean, sort of scrubbing bubbles just lift all that stuff over your palate. So you have that. But then there's kind of like what I call, and this is kind of a wine term that kind of bled over into beer, but attack, which is what level of intensity, bitterness, acidity do you have up front that's kind of stabby and cuts straight through like really fatty stuff or whatever else. And the same way in the wine world, you can take a lot of wines that are otherwise really nice and have something like a cassoulet, which is like a duck and bean and sausage stew, and the wine will just bounce right off of that. It's so heavy that the wines of the area, one called Mariran, which is made from a grape called Tanat. And as you would guess from the name Tanat, it's called that because it's really, really tannic. And if you drink it by itself, it's a bit much. But when you have it with cassoulet, it's just like, boom, it goes through like a sledgehammer and clears those heavy flavors off your palate. And it's delicious, but it's a lot of umami, and with things that have a lot of umami, you might want to come at that with something that's going to cut through, and that's the part of doing the contrast piece, which beer can do with bitterness. It always does it, or almost always does it, with carbonation.
Mm-hmm.
And contrast is really, having the contrast and the harmony is really the key to a lot of great dessert pairings.
Oh, okay.
Where, in a dessert, they tell you as a general principle, the dessert wine needs to be at least as sweet as the dessert, right? So they come with these dessert wines, and you have a sweet dessert and you have a sweet wine. So on your palate, that's sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet and sweet. Now, you might remember when you were a kid and you would eat an ice cream cone. Do you remember what that glass of water or glass of milk after the ice cream cone was like? That was the best glass of water you ever had in your whole life, or a glass of milk, because it wasn't sweet. Sweetness built up on your palate is basically a trigeminal form of pain. It's like, your system is like overloaded and seized up. And that's one reason why coffee seems so great with dessert, because you're having something that's not sweet and it's also warm, so that if you have something like chocolate that tends to like literally solidify when it hits a cold liquid, and then have a shield basically against hair on your palate, it works tremendously well. If you were to load up that same coffee with sugar until it was as sweet as a dessert wine, the pairing wouldn't work anymore.
Mm.
So in the same way, if you have an imperial stout with, say, a chocolate dessert, bitterness versus sweet, that's one level of pairing. And the second level of pairing is the roast with the roast. So you've got the contrast and the harmony going at the same time, and people's eyes just like roll up in their head. It is a round of competition at dinners that I'm like guaranteed to win. There's like nobody's ever beat me with a wine at dessert. It's almost impossible.
This is amazing.
Don's a real nerd, so he's really excited right now, Garrett, just so you know.
I think that, how do I phrase this? Like Stilton is a pretty fancy cheese, and we talked about even Parmesan. Well, Parmesan's not that fancy, I guess, but is there a food and beer pairing that people are likely to have the ingredients at home right now with a fairly easily accessible beer that, let's say they're new to beer and food pairing, that they could go to their fridge right now and do this and go, wow, really 1 + 1 does equal 3. I get it. I understand the importance of this.
Well, I will point out that I have found the best Stilton in the world, which is Colston Bassett Stilton, at every single Costco in the United States that I have done pairings out by a Costco. So, I'm going to push back a little bit because every Whole Foods, we say fancy. It's true. Your normal day-to-day, whatever, Pathmark supermarket or something. And I'm not giving a hard time to Pathmark. They may well have Stilton, but your everyday big American supermarket may not have it. But I think that some of these cheeses are more widespread than we think. Parmigiano Reggiano, I would actually say, is probably a bit more specialized than Stilton, because people have an alternative, or they think they have an alternative in, the green can. But I digress. Going back, I would say that goat cheeses, which you can get pretty much, at a deli in New York, goat cheeses almost always work with like kettle sours.
Oh, interesting. Right?
Okay. Whether they're fruited or not, right? You have goat cheese. What are the main properties of goat cheese? Tangy, fruity, citrusy, yogurty, if you like. Now you think of those flavors and you think of, whether a fruited or unfruited kettle sour, and even in your mind, it's kind of obvious, right? Like they're not going to clash with each other. The two acidities are going to row in, pretty well. So that's kind of the sort of thing that you can always do. You can find an imperial stout, really, and it's almost always going to pair with ice cream, cheesecake, and a number of other kind of, and obviously chocolate desserts, desserts like that. Also with a lot of fruit-based things, especially if the imperial stout has residual sweetness. A lot of modern kind of hazy, juicy IPAs. Some of those have a notable amount of residual sugar. Those can be great for really, really hot dishes. So you get a Thai dish that's got some pretty aggressive spicing to it, and maybe you find your local brewery is making a hazy IPA that has a notably sugary presence. People are adding less lactose than they were 2 or 3 years ago, but you still see that out there, and that's almost like a blanket to smother the fire. It's a nice counterpoint to have some residual sugar there. And in the wine world, you always hear people talk about sweet Riesling, for example, with really spicy food. Beer works even better.
Do you have any practical advice? Like, for example, we had Randy Mosher on for a prior episode, and he talked about retronasal and all that, and therefore it's nice to hold the beer in your mouth for a couple seconds. So in terms of beer and food, do you have a recommendation in terms of, take a sip of beer, take a bite of food, or vice versa, or hold a bit of the beer in your mouth while you take a bite of food, or anything like that?
No disrespect to Randy, but no.
Okay.
And I think Randy would say this too. There's a difference between, drinking and tasting, and eating and tasting are kind of two different activities. I'm not saying that, and you can do them at the same plate at different times, like taste something for right now and then just eat the rest of it. And they're kind of two different things. So I would say that, I like to taste each thing by itself first before I put them together. Okay. I want to know, what did the beer taste like? If I'm doing a beer dinner and I'm directing service, I always do not put the food down before the beer. The beer goes down first. And people, sometimes they don't listen. And the food arrives at the same time, and then you kind of lose the plot of what you're doing. First, you want to see what the beer tastes like. Then you want to see what the food tastes like. Then, you see what they taste like together.
Okay.
And the reason why, if you are tasting, is that how are you going to know when 2 + 2 = 7 if you didn't have the number 2 and the number 2 for each of those things in the first place, right? You don't even know what happened.
Right.
So,
yeah. No, perfect. That's exactly the advice I was looking for. Awesome.
Yeah.
Love that. You did make me think of another thing though. When if I have a plate of food, maybe a hamburger and it's got French fries and a side of pickle, how do I think about pairing where there's multiple things going on my plate?
Well, I think of the thing, when I think of a pickle, what are the things that I, think of first? And it depends on the pickle, right? Some pickles are kind of sweet, some are very sour, some are barely sour. So you kind of want to have some idea of like what you're talking about there. But yeah, what is, how big is it? What is the primary thing? So, okay, last night I had kimchi and I was worried because I was thinking of, I'd had beer like 3 nights in a row. I wanted to have some wine. I would have paired a white wine. I didn't have any chilled, and I decided to try a red wine that had some acidity. And my real worry was the kimchi going to be too hot? Turned out the kimchi was not that hot, and the pairing was actually very good because the acid levels lined up pretty directly. Even though this was a red wine, I knew that it had enough acid that it should work. So you kind of like think these things together. What's funny is that, it is more often that I will taste a pairing that is great and then back up. And I'm not saying that this is something that everybody wants to do on a regular basis, but I'm going to then say, okay, why does this work? I can't figure out why this works, and try to basically back engineer it to understand why particular pairings work out. And I guess, that's maybe a bit academic, but if you do it when you do taste a great pairing, then you might be able to recognize the next time that you can pull something off and go for it. And, as I've done this more and more over the years, I've learned to, I would say, stop insisting upon home runs.
Okay.
Because, and I'm not talking about just, well, I am talking also about eating at home, right? I mean, your average can of beer, even if you went and got a $20 4-pack, each of those cans was still $5. I mean, it's not really like that big a deal. It's like a double latte at Starbucks or something.
Right.
And so it's not really a big deal. And if it doesn't work out, well, you can always open something else. Learning something from that is always useful, because if you find something you're like, wow, that was killer, then you've got that thing forever. Like whatever it is, if you figured it out, you got it.
Yeah.
And so I would say to people to be adventurous. And now I'm also adventurous, and I didn't used to be, with audiences, where I'm like, okay, I'm a bit worried about this. I could see how I think that it's probably going to work, but it might not. Let's see. And that has more often than not produced much better results than I would have expected. Often when the idea came from a chef. And I'll give you an example. I had a dinner some years ago in Norway at a place called Toromeshukken, which is in Trondheim, 2 rooms and a kitchen. And I know this guy really well. He's a good pal, and he himself is a great cook. He's not really in the kitchen most of the time, but anyway, I'm looking at this menu and I'm looking at what I've got. At the time, I had this really beautiful creek, and I was looking to pair something with the creek. And I'm like, well, maybe some venison or whatever else. Like, well, in Trondheim, we do this eatable seafood. It's like, let's pair it up with the salmon. And I'm like, salmon and creek. Now, our creek was not that sour, but it had a pretty big cherry flavor. And I simply, in my mind, I was like, I can't see salmon and cherries.
No.
And like, this the idea of salmon and cherries. I'm like, that's disgusting. And I just couldn't. And he's like, trust me, I can see the way this is going to work. I've had your beers. The salmon's wonderful. And so I went and did that dinner, and I'll be damned, it was awesome. But the thing that I kind of realized afterwards is that when you're tasting something together, you're no longer tasting cherries per se. You're tasting the combination of these things. And when you taste a salmon, say, and a white wine, you're not tasting salmon and grapes.
Right.
Like salmon and grapes. Salmon and grapes. That sounds disgusting, right? I mean, like, who wants salmon and grapes? But in fact, when you put these things together, it is that 2 + 2, and it's not always easy to see what's going to happen. I trusted that they were well paired on their acidity levels, and that it was going to be seasoned right, and that he was obviously going to cook it right, and that one thing wouldn't overpower the other. I just couldn't get over the cherry idea until I did. And then later, a great chef told me that at a certain point in the springtime in Japan, sour cherries and salmon is a classic pairing.
Huh.
Oh.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I'm sort of speechless right now.
Yeah,
which like never happens.
No,
that's true.
I would not have figured that out on my own. And the thing is, when I tell people who are planning beer dinners, I'm like, okay, let's just set some ground rules, right? All beers pretty much work with all sausages, okay? Like, that's not really a beer dinner, okay? Like, we have some really great beer and some really great sausages. There are no surprises, in that pairing. Yeah, sure, it's going to be good. It's much more interesting if you're going to do a beer dinner, where you're showing off in some way. If you do show something that in some way has a surprise.
Yeah.
And that people are going to learn something that they can then use later.
Yeah.
What was the best beer dinner you ever went to or oversaw? I'm sure there's one in your mind that you're like, damn, that was top
Best
notch.
night of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
There are dozens, which is how I ended up, and this was 20 years ago, writing Brewmaster's Table. That's why that book was burning a hole in my pocket. But there are certainly pairings that stick in my mind in various ways. That salmon and cherry dish is one example, but I've literally done over 1,000 beer dinners and tastings. And so you tend to see principles more than remembering as many individual dishes as you might like. But I mean, it's kind of endless. So I hate to be
no, that's fine.
No, and I love that you did remember a few pairings that you shared with us, and I thought that was great.
But I do remember, though, speaking of salmon, just like one day having sitting down in Amsterdam, on one of the canals, and the sun was shining and it was springtime, and I had just this beautiful salmon dish and with lemon and a glass of wit beer, and I was like, this is the best thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. This is the best thing I've ever had in my entire life. It was just like these two things together in this place with these leaves and this water and everything else. And I was just, virtually, in tears. I was so happy. And you remember, it's more moments like that. This past, it's almost a year now. A year ago, Vinny and Natalie Slertzo from Russian River and I were in Belgium, and we just happened upon this place we didn't happen upon it. We knew where it was outside of Brussels, on a kind of canal. Again, beautiful day, and the frogs are singing, whatever else. And that time of year, they've got the trout are running. They've got the young asparagus, white asparagus, and hollandaise sauce. And, we just ran through a gamut of beautiful Belgian beers. And, it was just one of those lunches that was just, amazing.
I need to get invited to some of these sometime.
Yeah.
But, look, I've got on my phone right now, I've got stuff that I'm doing in Norway. So you'll be the first to hear of it.
Okay.
And some of these are some of them I really have to think hard. Grilled giga scallops glazed with goat butter and aged cherry vinegar sauce from preserved strawberries and brown butter, almost burnt cauliflower puree, and calyx vondachiro. Now, I know what almost all these flavors are, thankfully, and I put this together with basically a triple. Another one is dry aged duck roasted on the bone with Brussels sprouts, duck sauce infused with dry herbs and white truffle. We have a beer where we have infused the beer with Nebbiolo pomace, and so Nebbiolo is the grape that you use to make Barolo. And there's a local winery, and when they press off their wine, the skin, seeds, stems come to us, and we steep beers with them. Wild turbo with blue mussel mousseline sauce, grill leek, and exo caviar. And that's another beer on that we're doing on pomace, but that one has more acidity. And then, here's one, Hand and Seal Cognac. So Hand and Seal is a 13.5% barley wine. This is the cognac aged edition, which is was never sold publicly. It's my personal stash. And the original version was Petit Four, raspberry, and citrus. Now here's one where I came back and I was like, okay, I'm worried about this one. Okay, I got a barley wine that it was 2014. It is 9 years old. It's got some sweetness, but it's in this kind of somewhere between being young and being old kind of state. It'll have some big Parmesan, pineapple kind of characteristics to it. And I'm just worried about the raspberry and citrus, rather than working together, just kind of being a distraction that go in a different direction. And in that case, I'd rather like row along with something that's going to at least be going either clearly in the same direction, or something that is a little less neutral, more neutral. Because like raspberry is a really big flavor. It takes very, very little raspberry to flavor a beer, to flavor, a tonic water, whatever. And so we probably will end up going in a different direction on that one. And so, that's kind of, now, obviously these are really high-end dinners. This is not, Tuesday night dinner at Garrett's, by any means, but they are mental exercises for sure, because I have a certain number of things to work with, which I know, and then I have these dishes that I have to imagine. And I think it's one of those things people ask all the time, well, do you have an extraordinary palate, or is it practice? It's like, well, it's practice. It's like the more you do it, the more you're going to know, and the more you know, the more you understand, and the easier it gets. But also the more fun you're going to have, because you're going to just be able to do fun things with dinner every day based on what's at the supermarket. I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, if you can go get this stuff on a regular basis, it's relatively cheap, and it makes dinner slightly better every day. That'll make your life just that little bit better. And if your life gets 1% better, 0.5% better, when was the last time you found something that's going to make your life 1% better? It doesn't happen every day. So it's a pretty good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and look at you now. Your life sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Brewmaster Stable, 20 years old.
20 years.
Yeah. So first of all, are you going to give us the inside tip that you're working on a second edition?
No.
Oh.
And say, when I say no, I don't mean like, no, I'm not telling you, but I mean, no, I'm not going to do it.
Okay.
And I think there's for me, there's like a reason for that. I think that Brewmaster's Table was written at it. I'm glad that people still find it, relevant. People write me every day telling me, I used it for my Cicerone exams, and it was, tremendous resource. And I think that everything in there, those principles are true, and are still really useful. And I enjoy the writing when I read it, but it does sound almost like it was written by somebody that I used to know. 20 years is a long time, and I've tasted a lot of things. I've had a lot of other thoughts. And it's not that I would contradict anything that's in there, but it would be a different book with a completely different tone. At that point, 20 years ago, it was still easier for me to reach for that wide-eyed, walking in with no preconceptions, kind of idea, which is a great place to be. But you can't stay there forever. You change over time. And so I think that book is a great book, especially for people who go in knowing absolutely nothing about beer, but would like to learn, because it does start from the beginning, and it's very patient, and builds your knowledge over the course of the book. And by the time you're done with it, you kind of know a lot. And it has more of a sense of wonder about it than it is going to have after another 20 years. Now, if I wrote another edition, I think that I could write an edition which was just as good, I hope. Maybe in some ways it would be better, but it would be different. And I'm not sure it would be more useful to the reader. It would be, it'd be interesting as an exercise for me, but for the reader, I think that it's good as it is. So, I think I'll leave it alone.
Okay. No volume 2 then.
No volume 2 planned.
Okay. Em, do you want to do this lightning round? Do you think that'll
Yes.
be fun?
I think we're
Okay.
gonna, if as long as Garrett's down.
I
to
I got
do it.
a couple more minutes. Let's go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lightning round. We're going to suggest a food, and then you just suggest a beer or a beer style that'll go with it.
Ooh, okay.
Sound like fun? Em can go first.
I'll let you know in a minute.
Okay. Em can go first.
All right. My first food is fried chicken.
Oh, fried chicken. I mean, American amber lager is just great with fried chicken. It's like, and it's that whole thing of the caramelized, crunchy exterior, a little bit of sweetness and caramel flavor. Boom. Brooklyn lager and fried chicken are a great combination.
All right. Grilled cheese sandwich.
Ooh, grilled cheese sandwich. I'm going to go for German Dunkel.
Oh,
And you've got you've grilled the exterior until it's starting to get nice and brown, toasty brown. You got a lot of salt in your cheese, and you come with a Dunkel or a Doppelbock, and you're going to have that malty, a little bit of residual sugar, unctuousness, and those two things, kind of the salt and the sweet next to each other, perfect.
Oh, awesome. Em, next up.
All right. Mixed green salad.
Wit beer.
Oh, you didn't even have to think about that one.
Yeah. So, also, I would say modern saison often.
Oh,
Where
yes.
where when I say modern, I mean like the last 10 years, where you're seeing some acidity and wild yeast flavors blended in. As long as it's not too bitter, that can work really well because you almost always have acidity in your salad dressing. So the wit beer is working to some extent for the same reason.
Yeah.
It's soft, not too bitter, and you have a little zing of acidity in there from the wheat, and tends to row in together.
My next one, I'm going to steal this one from Em. Bodega bacon, egg, and cheese.
No, that was mine. BEC. Come on.
Yeah. That is such a funny thought, because Bodega bacon, egg, and cheese is a classic New York like hangover food.
Yeah.
So I've always had bacon, egg, and cheese with coffee. So I'm going to say I would have it with porter. Because the roasted character, a little bit of sweetness. I'm going to kind of go in the coffee direction, and it's going to really engage with that bacon. Which is, but again, salty flavors, roasted flavors, caramel flavors. Those three things together, a little bit smoky, the bacon, porter, boom. It'll be actually great.
Awesome. We know that you have a hard deadline here. So if you could quickly tell us where people can find you on social media and learn about things that you're doing and Brooklyn Brewing is doing, and then give us, as your parting thought, the beer pairing with an ice cream sandwich.
Well, there's you can find me. I'm not on Facebook that much these days, but I'm just Garrett Oliver on Facebook. I'm Garrett Oliver on Twitter. Garrett Oliver is where you're going to see me the most on Instagram. Okay. And a lot of my regular posts are about other stuff going on, but my stories are usually somewhere between food, drinks, art, and music. So,
okay. And a food pairing with ice cream sandwich.
It has to be.
Or beer pairing, I'm sorry.
It's got to be imperial style, because the ice cream sandwich usually has like dark chocolate cookie thing on the outside and vanilla ice cream on the inside, the classic, and roasted malts, a little bit of residual sweetness. Can't go wrong.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Garrett.
Yeah, this was great, Garrett. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to hear from you, and I look forward to hear you. So,
Em, what did you think of that?
I just want to let you know, Don, that I have Stilton in my fridge, and it's not that it's $6 at Trader Joe's. I had it for lunch.
Wow.
Yeah, I have a little bowl of soup, and then I have a little Stilton with some crackers, and it's like the best cheese on God's green earth. And it works really well. Yeah, it works so well with. I want it now. I want to I know it's It's time to have a beer. Now I want to have it with an imperial stout because that just sounds
Yes.
really.
Well,
That's gonna
I
yeah.
am not fancy like you, so I don't have Stilton in my fridge, but I'm gonna go get some just so I can do the pairing. I have to say, I taste beer a lot, obviously, so do you. I think I'm a very conscientious taster, more so with beer than anything else. But I never would have, like, if you asked me to describe the taste of Stilton, I never would have said chocolate or fudge. Or if you asked me to describe the taste of Parmesan, I never would have said pineapple. And then when he says it, he's right.
Oh yeah. It's really
I-
it's really fascinating. I really liked the science when he brought science into it. So like the
Yes.
ethyl butyrate, that pineapple flavor. I really like. That's why I think I really like the New England IPA and taco, because when you use a hop, say like Hallertau Blanc, which is that big pineapple note, and it's essentially you're adding pineapple salsa to your taco.
Right. So
And
similarly, you could have a pineapple flavored beer to go with pizza, because everybody knows pineapple on pizza is the best pizza.
oh, okay, all right. I think we're done here.
Okay, well then, our listeners should visit allaboutbeer.com and follow us on social media at allaboutbeer, or visit patreon.com. Actually, I shouldn't say or, I should say and visit us at patreon.com/allaboutbeer to support this show and others. If you have questions for the experts, please email us at podcast@allaboutbeer.com. And that's also the email for feedback, suggestions, or to inquire about supporting this show through advertising. Speaking of advertising, here's a short word from our sponsors.
Attention all managers and team leaders. Do you want to provide your staff with the best training in the beer industry? Look no further than Beer Savvy Online by the Cicerone Certification Program. In just a few hours, your team will master the fundamentals of excellent beer service, styles, and beer flavor. At the end of the course, your team can earn a globally recognized beer industry credential. And the best part, as a manager, you can monitor your team's learning progress. Set your business apart with a beer savvy staff today. To learn more, visit cicerone.org and click on the group training button. And if you'd like to learn more about how you can get your company or message featured on this show and others produced by All About Beer, please reach out to podcast@allaboutbeer.com. Thanks again to Cicerone for sponsoring this episode.
Before we go, if you like this podcast, one easy thing you can do to help us is to give us a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting app. That helps other people find the show. We would also appreciate it if you would let your beer-loving friends know about this show, and that helps us spread the word of good beer. Em, how can people reach out to you?
I am at Pints and Panels across all social media, and my website is www.pintsandpanels.com. How about you, Don?
I am at The Dawn of Beer on Twitter and Instagram, and people can drop me an email at don@thedawnofbeer.com. This show is produced by All About Beer. Visit allaboutbeer.com for articles, notes on this show and others, and to connect via the newsletter and social media. Cheers.
Cheers.